He's back. I hear him again.
There we go.
There's no even intro. We're just gonna go right back into
got
him.
it back.
Yep, we bring in our reliever, Bryce Koon.
Love it.
Covers LSU football for 247 Sports. Bryce, I appreciate you coming on the show. I know this is your first time on the show. We like to have a lot of fun. There wasn't much fun that happened on Sunday, right? Everybody watched the game. Everybody saw the performance LSU put out. Today you had the ability to interview some of the players and the coaches. What is the feel of that you're getting in the locker room after this disappointing loss on Sunday?
Yeah, no, and look, you just mentioned right there, I mean, we just walked out of player interviews, and the feeling is obviously one of just kind of a sour taste in their mouths. That was something that Jay Daniels said. Look, this is a sour taste in our mouths. We don't want to feel like this again. So, what do we have to do to kind of make that happen, make that not happen again? Obviously, this week, I mean, I'm standing right here behind how you're standing. This place now might not be standing if they don't take care of business this weekend. But I don't know how much you're really going to be able to learn from this game. But I asked Daniels the question of, what would make you feel good, especially about the offense walking out of the building. He said, look, we just need to be dominant. We got to be dominant in all aspects of the game. That's our standard, and that's what we have to do. And, look, I know it's an ongoing quarterback conversation, but for me, this is year one of covering LSU. And so I understand the frustrations that happened on Sunday night. Guys, I said in the camp of you didn't lose the game because of Daniels.
Right,
you lost the game because you got dominated in nearly every single facet of the football game. So I think that what this team needs to do, take the feeling that you felt and kind of make Grambling State kind of the whipping boy, per se. I mean, take that frustration out because you jump right into SEC play the next weekend up in Starkville.
Very similar to what they did last year to Southern after the first week of Florida State last year. Now, obviously, you can say, hey, we need to do this. This is what would make us feel good about the game. But did they give you hey, how are we going to do this, right? Like, this is what we want to do, but have they talked about how they are going to make these changes and look dominant and do the things they want to do?
Well, I mean, that's the gold question, right? I mean, we start offensively with it. Daniels was pretty hard on himself in the sense of he felt like he did too much. I guess, look, as the quarterback of a team, when you see things start to slip away, it's obvious that you're going to then try to take control, and you're going to try to, grab a tighter hold on the reins. And I think that's exactly what happened. And look, you said we got to be able to trust the playmakers. You got to be able to run the football. Look, when you can't. This season's going to be a long year if they can't run the football, and Daniels is the leading rusher every single game. And then, he said, look, we got to get on the same wavelength, with our receivers. When you go back to that game, and a lot of people don't want to go back and watch it. My job calls that I have to, so I had to. When you go back and look at it, it really was determined that they felt like they were comfortable on two routes: the comeback route to Neighbors and kind of the out route into flat to Mason Taylor. He said, look, we've got to do more. Like we can't just rely on that because they're going to start to read that. You can't get away with those things against these teams. So it's the same moniker that they talked about in fall camp. We got to be more explosive. That's just the thing where I think fans were so frustrated that you heard that all fall camp and it just didn't show. Now, a lot of the credit has to go to Florida State, guys. That's a really good football team. Like, that's a really good football team they played. I think defensively, I mean, for me, it would be I got to see Harold Perkins off the edge earlier in the football game. Like, I got to see him utilized to his strengths. I'm not a player personnel guy. I'm not an NFL scout. But what I do know is if you're at LSU and you're going to want to win some big-time football games, he has to be more involved in pass rush off the edge, whether it's from the interior or either side. If you're going to beat the Alabamas, the Florida States, or who you could potentially face in the SEC title games. So that's got to happen. Defensively, Omar Speights talked about the fact they can't hang their heads, and he admitted they had to make a choice this week. It's one of those things where, look, are we going to respond from this, or are we going to let this define us? And, when you get to, what that looks like, he said, we just got to be more aggressive. Like, he goes, yeah, of course. We knew Florida State. Like, it wasn't a surprise when Keon Coleman walked out there and he was 6'6", 6'7". That wasn't a surprise. We knew that. But you can't let that mentally take you out of the game. And, they're not – I don't know if they're going to face another receiving corps that has the size and talent that Florida State does. But that's just something for me. Like, you can't back down for the mental challenge. And it really felt like being in the building when – the only reason Florida State stopped scoring was because the clock hit zero.
Right.
Like that's the tough hard truth of what happened. they kind of had what they wanted. And even in that type of game, you have to have a sense of pride. And Spates said they let that get away from them. Like, they let that pride get away from them and hung their heads, which is just kind of, understanding LSU, understanding Brian Kelly. That's kind of uncharacteristic to have a team that kind of loses that in the middle of the game.
A big part of the conversation we had here is how much culture matters and how much caring matters and how much what you put into it actually matters. There's an old saying that says the eye in the sky doesn't lie, right? After talking to these guys a few days removed from them getting a chance to watch the film, do you sense a feeling of maybe, I guess, some sort of embarrassment of what they actually put on film to be out there for other teams to feel that they could actually, I guess, pull out of them or beat out of them, if you will?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Daniel said that can't be the tape that we put on there from an LSU standard for a fan base and a program that has this much tradition and pride. When I walked out of Camping World Stadium on Sunday night, I said, that's a team that walked in there and said, we're from the big bad SEC. We beat Alabama last year. We, got to Atlanta. I know that they have all these guys, but we're LSU, and we got a cool logo on our helmet that means a lot. And, it was a humbling experience, and I think you could see that on the guys' faces as they left the field. But then 48 hours, 72 hours removed now, it started to kind of sink in, hey, what Kelly said, we're not who we think we are. And it's not a physical thing. And Kelly made sure to kind of make tune of that in yesterday's press conference. It's mental. And so I think that this team kind of, it's a brutal wake-up call. I mean, look, nobody likes to get beat that bad on a national stage because you get the Twitter comments, you get the, I'm a part of a message board on 24/7 Sports. It has just been.
I can't imagine what you're seeing. I can't imagine.
Oh my gosh! I mean, so you hate to have that happen to you, but they said at least this embarrassing thing happens in game one. And we mentioned, and you guys mentioned this too. Yes, this is what happened last year, but the expectations weren't there last year.
Right.
The expectations last year were, hey, we just want to look competitive. We want to look competitive in the SEC this season. So when you get to this kind of frame of mind to where all of this preseason hype, all of this potential dark horse playoff contender, and then you come out that flat, well, the fans start singing a different tune. And I think that, for this team inside to kind of go to your point, look, they're embarrassed. And I think it goes into the aspect of we need to go out and we need to give this home crowd something to be passionate and reinvigorate this crowd when we get there on Saturday night.
You kind of talked a little bit about this. You talked about the physicality, right? It's not about the guys on the field, right? The talent's there. These guys are physical. They're talented. They're the guys. It's the mental side of the game. Like, how do you don't usually see LSU being out physical, right? You don't see a team coming out there and kind of punch them in the mouth. We felt like that was kind of the case this past weekend. And so, the X's and O's side, that's fixable. You can make adjustments. You can do that stuff. But the effort level and getting punched in the mouth, that is something that has to come within the players. And how is that fixable? Obviously, they talk about, it's a mental thing. You got to have a different mindset. But are they doing anything specifically to try to change that mindset, right? Like, there's some things you can do to trick your mind, whatever it is. But, it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do it. What are they doing to kind of change that, to flip that mindset?
Bull in the ring.
Yeah, Oklahoma drills.
Yeah, what was the old LSU drill that went viral on YouTube a couple of years back?
Big cat drill,
the
baby.
Tiger drill or something they did, absolutely. The big cat drill, yeah, the big cat drill. I mean, get that out there. No, well, the first domino was how bad you got beat. I mean, if that wasn't humbling enough on national television, you're the only game. Like for me, I'm 5'10", guys. I'm not near the size, but that would fire me up. Like, to start to see that and to start to see, like, what people are saying about you nationally and around the country, like, oh, this is a fraud, this team's not real, Brian Kelly is not fit to be the head coach of LSU. All these absurd comments that are being put out there kind of in the social media sphere, that would fire me up. But when you kind of get to the mental toughness, I mean, look, this is my first year covering LSU, but I've always watched the SEC and always watched LSU from afar. I've never seen this team be mentally broken as it kind of felt like they were. I mean, Florida State didn't stop it, and it brings up the question of some of those early penalties that happened in that game. Yes, they were way too aggressive, but to me, it set the tone.
Yeah.
Like, Florida State was able to rein that in. LSU never even got to that point. It's one of those things. I'll attribute, you guys are baseball guys. When you hit a walk-off home run and you're just going, or you hit a big home run and or a big strikeout and you're going crazy, and the coach says, hey, let's temper it down.
Right.
I'd much rather temper that down than have to get you fired up.
Absolutely.
And so I think that was something that we saw in this game never really happened. So it brings, what are they doing? There's the coach speak of getting back to the basics, getting back to who you are. But my question is, who are you? Like, who are you? Are you going to be the team that was, shown on a national stage, or are you going to let something else define you? And so getting back to those things, I mean, we joke about it, some of those high-pressure practices. I mean, Omar Speights said today, he said this was one of the hardest practices that they've had altogether. I mean, it's still obviously early with fall camp and all these type of things, but, he said this was one where you could tell guys were still working off of the anger that happened to them, whether it's a personal thing. Look, I'll say this. As a defensive back, I would be most aggressive in a practice this week than I ever was.
Yeah.
Because you got mossed. You got flat out beat. And some of those things you can't help because, once again, Keon Coleman's just that big, and that's going to happen. But from a pride standpoint, Kelly talked about, like, we have to be willing to attack more. We can't get conservative when we kind of get beat. And so, Omar Speights said that there were guys flying around at practice today. That's a comforting thing to hear, but it's not necessarily something we get to see. And for me, we saw things all fall camp and practice. I need to see it in a game. For me, just for my objective eyes, I got to see it happen in a game before I say, okay, they're back on the right track.
For sure.
You talked a lot about the defense and what's been going on. Obviously, especially with the cornerback room, Brian Kelly comes out and says Denver Harris is now available. What do you put into that?
Think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that it seems like that room could use some help. But whenever you hear that, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to start or even really get to play, but he will be dressed out. Is there a reason for LSU fans to be so excited about Denver Harris? What did you see in spring and fall camp from him that maybe he can change the room and maybe can change the attitude of the defense a little bit?
Well, I mean, look, there's no knocking the talent this kid has. The God-given talent that a lot of us would love to have, and a lot of the guys in that cornerback room wish they had. It's going to be all between the ears for him. Can he keep his cool? But like we talked about, I mean, what have been the key words, the buzzwords? Competitive edge, aggressiveness, attacking. Those are things that he showed during fall camp. Now, was it all under control? Was it all, placed in the best manner? No, I think that's safe to say. But you got to have some guy that just is willing to sometimes just take the head off of somebody and show some type of aggressive nature, because sometimes you just got to see, stand back and see who's going to bring the passion, who's going to bring that competitive fire and competitive spirit. So do I think that this kid is ready to play against the Alabamas, the Florida States of the world? Look, he showed a little bit on tape in College Station last year. I still think that needs to be an opportunity for him to develop. Yeah. But where this cornerback room is, you just got to find some dogs. Mm-hmm. Like, you just got to find some guys that it doesn't matter if you're 5'9", 5'10", 5'11", you're 6'1", 6'2", they're going to play like they're the best corner in the nation. I mean, look, that's a matchup that you watch corners and wide receivers, those are the prima donnas of college football and NFL. Like, those are the guys that make the big bucks, they're flashy, all these different things. So inserting Denver Harris, look, I think he's going to get some reps. I do caution the fans. There was a reason outside of him being in the proverbial doghouse that he was running third team. It was, whether it's a schematical thing for him, him learning the game of football. Kids like this, oftentimes, you see them dominate in high school because they're the best athlete on the field. They're by far the best player on the field. They can get away with things. You're not going to get away with that in, major high-quality college football, and especially in the SEC. So it's a battle that I think Matt House and this entire defense is, going through. Do we throw this kid out here to the wolves and just let him grow on his own, or do we keep developing him? But I think you left that first game saying, hey, we need to spark somewhere. Mm-hmm. And if one of these veteran guys is not going to provide that, it's got to be an open battle to see who will.
You mentioned some veteran guys. Obviously, Mason Smith gets to talk to the media, and Coach Kelly obviously spoke about him and him getting back, and he actually used the word giddy, as excited as he is going to have him back on the line. I think that's somebody that you say you want a dog. I think Mason Smith feels that probably in spades. He said he's going to be able to play up to, 30 or 50 snaps. What do you expect to see from Mason Smith, and how much do you think that his presence will actually change the attitude of the team?
I mean, I think Mason Smith is exactly what you just described. A guy that has that dog mentality, a guy that in a game, he's one of those as a coach that you just say, okay, we're going to take the reins off of him a little bit because we understand he has that controlled aggression. Like when he gets pumped up after a big play, it's not to show up the other team, but it's to fire up his own teammates. So you need that, especially on this team right now. Smith kind of, gave a sly grin when we mentioned the 30 snaps. He said, look, hey, it's been a year and 2 days. He's kept it on his phone since he, tore the ACL against Florida State. That was September 4th of last year. He knows, he's well aware of what this means for this team. He's also, I think, well aware of what it means for him personally. We asked him, what does he envision, his return like? He said, look, he's been playing football since his days in Hola, since he was 6 years old. He said, I've never sat out this long. You get back to playing a game you love and get back the opportunity, something you feel like was taken away from you. He said, you want to make the most of it. And so I think it's something where he understands that he can play with inside of himself. And that group, compared to last year, has better talent and better depth. So while he's going to be playing that maybe 30, 40, 50 snaps on Saturday, he said, look, we've got to get these guys ready for the Alabamas, the Mississippi States, the Arkansas, the Auburns, these physical teams that we're going to face because, look, nicks and cuts are going to happen. And all these guys have got to be willing to play. And he said, look, that's a big reason why Mekhi Wingo was on so many, preseason lists entering this season because he took advantage of that opportunity. So while it's going to be a group by committee, look, anytime you can add an All-American type of player and a guy that could be a day one draft pick, you're never going to, I'll use the word, not be giddy, like Brian Kelly said about that.
So you talked about a couple of these guys. Obviously, Mason Smith's coming back. That's going to be a new face. We haven't seen him in a year. There's a lot of hype behind this freshman class that we brought in, right? They have some guys in the receiving room that they brought in. It was a really good recruiting class as far as receivers goes. You have Toviano who came through. You have some guys that you had in the other prior recruiting classes that were highly ranked and that were super talented. Going into this week, can you expect us to see some of these young guys get more opportunity to play on the field? Because it felt like Brian Kelly used the veteran guys and played them the first game because it was a big game, and he felt like he had more confidence in them because of their experience, but they may not have been the most talented, quote-unquote, on the team. Can you expect to see some of these young guys, and what new faces are you expecting to see? And the second part of this question, I guess it's two questions, is on the offensive line. You talked about physicality. When can we see Hurd move into that right tackle spot and move Emory Jones down to that right guard spot, which I feel like is his natural position?
So we'll tackle the first one here. We saw him for about a snap or two due to, I think, Deuce Chestnut came up a little bit wobbly after one play. But Ashton Stamps, a guy that wasn't a highly rated recruit. I think this is a game that, like we mentioned, it's a young secondary. You got plenty of options there. Stamps is a guy that looked really good in fall camp. Here's the chance for him against game speed. How does that translate? It's easy to make those plays in practices. When you've been playing against these guys, you kind of know what they're going to run. But in a game, what does it look like when you're under the bright lights? Stamps is a guy for me that I'm really excited to watch. Ryan Yates, another one, from that safety position. I think that there is an opportunity for playing time on the back end as we get, into this season where, one, these guys are going to be called upon, and this is a game where you need to see that. Of course,
Be careful out there. Be careful out there.
I got to look behind me. I'm new to Baton Rouge. I don't know
That's BatonRouge.com, baby.
Be careful back there.
Yeah. But,
There goes Denver Harris.
I think you see.
The nightly news.
Easy, Floyd.
Oh, man,
what are we doing over here?
Oh, gosh. All right, rub my face off. No, seriously, secondary, you have some opportunities, for guys to step up. And then you mentioned, offensively. Look, guys, the biggest thing that killed me was the wide receiver room. Kyron Lacey, had a tough game.
Yeah.
We don't need to rehash everything that happened. Guys like Kyle Parker, Sheldon Sampson, Aaron Anderson. Is Aaron Anderson a guy, maybe he struggles in punt return, but look, he was a weapon during the spring with the offense. We didn't see any of that, anything schematically really drawn up for him. So I think there's an opportunity. Those are kind of three names offensively, and then a guy that really shined in the scrimmage we got to watch during fall camp was Caleb Jackson. You can't have, outside of a 35-yard run that I believe, I think it was Josh Williams.
That's Josh Williams.
I think they were like 8 carries for 11 yards for 3 guys, not named Jaden Daniels, outside of that 35-yard run. Caleb Jackson looked the part in fall camp. it's easy to look apart. But I think this is the game where it says, hey, there's a chance for me to go do some damage and me to prove myself when the older guys really didn't necessarily kind of cinch that spot down in a primetime game. Now I get a chance to build up to that in a game where I should get plenty of opportunities.
No doubt. Bryce, man, I appreciate it. This was a great introduction. This is the first time I get to meet you. This is the first time on the show. Can't wait to have you on a lot more throughout the course of the year. We appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. We'll have you on again soon.
All right, appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much for having me. We'll talk again soon.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Hell yeah.
Take
Thank
it
you,
easy.
man. Be safe out there.